In 2008, 13 students vanished without a trace during a school trip to a remote forest in Delpine. Despite extensive searches and countless theories, the mystery of their disappearance remained unsolved, leaving only unanswered questions. 17 years later, a shocking discovery would emerge, revealing a hidden truth that no one could have anticipated. A secret buried for years is about to surface. Before we begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is over there. It really means a lot to know that you're with us. We're going through this together. Now let me tell you what really happened. Leon entered the small cafe in the town of Delpine, the dim light from the fluorescent lamps reflecting off the old wooden tables. He slowly looked around. The faces were all too familiar, yet no one looked back. The whole town was still the same, still silent, still indifferent to what had happened 17 years ago. He walked to the counter and ordered a black coffee, no sugar. The barista handed him the cup and softly said, "Haven't seen you around for a long time, Leon." "Yeah, it's been a while," Leon replied, but didn't smile. He took the cup and sat down at a table near the window. Everything around him remained unchanged, just as it was when he left. But inside him, everything had shifted. Not because of time, but because of the unanswered questions. After a while of silence, he placed the coffee cup down on the table, took out a stack of files from his bag, and opened them. The documents related to the disappearance of his sister, Maya, and the other students had been buried for nearly 2 decades. For him, being a detective wasn't about passion, nor about earning money, but for one sole reason: to find his missing sister. Before long, he realized that everything was just becoming more and more unclear. He went to the police station, where he might find a bit of useful information. At the police station, Leon walked in and saw Chief Mark sitting behind his desk. Mark looked up, his eyes a bit surprised, but still maintained his cold demeanor. "Leon, back again?" "I can't just leave it be, Mark," Leon replied, sitting down in the chair across from him. "I want to review the files on the 2008 disappearance." Mark sighed, shaking his head. "We closed that case already. There's nothing new. You can't keep coming back like this." "Why not?" Leon couldn't hold back his anger. "There are still millions of unanswered questions. Why doesn't anyone want to reopen this case?" Mark shrugged and looked away. "You know why. It's all been resolved. There's no evidence, no clues. Everything's been wiped clean." "Wiped clean?" Leon furrowed his brow. "How could everything related to 13 missing students and 1 teacher be wiped clean?" Mark didn't answer, just pursed his lips and looked out the window. Leon knew he didn't want to say anything more, but his unease was growing clearer. "So why aren't there any records in the archives?" Leon didn't let up, his voice firm. "I spoke to the secretary at the school. She said all the documents were deleted. Is that true?" Mark looked at him for a moment, then sighed. "That was the decision of the school board and the higher-ups. You understand, don't you?" Leon felt like something was off. He stood up. "Thanks, Mark. I'll handle this myself." Walking out of the police station, Leon felt like there was an invisible wall weighing him down. It wasn't just disappointment, but helplessness. He knew there was something bigger being hidden, and Delpine didn't want him to uncover it. Back in his car, Leon took out his phone and called Julie, an old high school friend who now worked at the library. "Julie, I need your help checking some old documents. Something related to the 2008 disappearance. There might be a lead." Julie hesitated. "Leon, you know I can't break the rules. The library erased all those copies a long time ago." "I know, but I need whatever is left. Help me just this once. You know I can't keep living without answers." A pause stretched on, then Julie sighed. "All right, but just this once. I'll try." In the following days, Leon kept investigating by every means he could. He went to every corner of Delpine, talked to anyone he could reach, But all the answers were the same. There's nothing new. Everyone seemed to be cautious, perhaps not because they didn't know, but because they didn't want to know. He went to the old house of Alice, one of the missing students. But when he arrived, the house was abandoned, windows covered in dust, with no sign of a family ever having lived there. Leon stood in front of the door and sighed. Everything had become irretrievable. Finally, on a late afternoon, Leon stood on a hilltop overlooking the town. Everything here seemed peaceful, but inside him the truth was slowly unfolding. He knew that to get answers, he would have to face forces much bigger, people who had done everything to hide the truth. Leon had no choice but to continue the investigation, even if it meant paying a price for his curiosity and determination. But he couldn't give up. The questions kept echoing in his head. He couldn't give up on his sister. He couldn't give up on the children who had disappeared on a trip no one really knew what had happened to. He turned, walking into the shadows of the small town where untold stories had never been revealed. Leon had gotten used to living with the dim memories of his sister Maya's disappearance. For 17 years, he had read hundreds of documents, spoken to countless people, but all had led to silent walls. He had decided to return to Delpine to uncover the truth, but all he received were meager answers and the rejection of the townsfolk. One morning, after a sleepless night, Leon decided to return to Delpine School, where everything had started. He stood outside the school gate, looking into the classroom windows where Maya and the other children used to study. He sighed, then walked inside. As soon as he stepped into the school office, Secretary Oldham looked up at him. She was the only person in the school whom he could still recognize from before. She hadn't changed a bit, still the stern woman with a distant gaze. "Hello," Leon said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I want to review the files on the 2008 disappearance." Secretary Oldham didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a moment, then sighed. "Leon, you don't understand. This has been over for a long time. The files are gone. What are you looking for?" "I just want to see the information, any documents related to the case," Leon replied, his voice firm. The secretary shook her head. "You can't. Everything has been wiped clean. That was the decision of the school board. The disappearance wasn't anything special, just an accident." "An accident?" Leon asked, unable to hide his surprise in his voice. "There's no trace, no evidence that it was an accident. How can it be called an accident?" Secretary Oldham looked away. "You keep asking like this. It's just going to make things harder. Everyone in the town wants to forget about it. You should too." Leon said nothing more. He stood up, walked out of the office, his heart heavy. The feeling of helplessness began to creep in. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't let this go without an answer. As he walked out of the school, Leon didn't know where to go. He stood for a moment outside the gate, thinking. Suddenly he noticed a woman standing near the corner of the street looking at him. She had long hair and sharp eyes, wearing a long black coat. She stood there as if waiting for someone. Leon didn't pay much attention, but then she approached him, her sharp gaze never leaving him. "You're Leon, right?" she asked, her voice steady but not cold. Leon looked at her for a moment, a strange feeling creeping in. "Yes, I'm Leon. Who are you?" She smiled, a gentle smile but also one full of hidden meaning. "My name is Rachel," she said. "I know you're looking for the truth about the disappearance. I can help you." Leon frowned. "Help me? What do you know about this case?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Rachel looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "You may not believe it, but I know there's information you won't be able to easily access. The documents, the evidence, they've been hidden." Leon froze, unable to say anything. Everything inside him suddenly stopped. "What do you know, and why do you want to help me?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. She just stood still for a moment, then spoke. I'm not involved in the investigation, but I've worked with a research group connected to this case. I have information about what really happened, but I need your help. Leon felt something very strange. Help you how? Rachel paused for a moment, then continued. You need to help me with something, and if you do, I'll help you access important leads. I need to know right now, Leon replied, trying to stay calm. Help me get a divorce, Rachel said casually. Leon stood frozen. What? He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Rachel was not flustered. She looked at him with a cold but determined expression. My marriage is in trouble. I need a valid reason to get a divorce without facing opposition from my husband. You help me, I'll help you get the important documents you're looking for. Leon stayed silent, looking into her eyes. So, what should I do? Rachel continued to explain. My husband is very meticulous and conservative. If I try to divorce him unilaterally, he won't agree and will try to take everything from me. But if there's a strong reason, like an affair, he won't be able to oppose it. You just need to pretend to be my lover, maintain the relationship for a while, and that will give me a valid reason. Pretend to be a lover? Leon frowned, unable to believe what he was hearing. What do you want me to do? Do you think I can participate in this? Rachel didn't seem bothered, maintaining her composure. I know this is a strange request, but if you want to know the truth, you have to do it. I'll help you access all the information I have. You'll find important evidence about your sister's disappearance, and I'll help you go in the right direction. Finally, he sighed. All right, I'll help you, but I'll keep control. Rachel smiled lightly, her gaze satisfied. Thank you, Leon. I'll make sure you get everything you need. Together, we'll uncover the truth. Leon sat in the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the winding roads leading into Bear Hollow. Beside him, Rachel remained silent, driving with a serious expression. Since she had revealed the strange things about Bear Hollow and the government's secret experiments, Leon had many questions but didn't know how to ask. A feeling of anxiety rose within him as the car began to turn onto the narrow road leading to the area where the bus had disappeared. Leon looked out the window, feeling a strange sense of unease. Rachel, are you sure we'll find something here? Leon finally spoke, his voice low. Rachel glanced at him through the rearview mirror, responding calmly. You have to trust me. This is where everything began. Everything happens for a reason. Leon didn't answer, but in his heart there was an unease he couldn't shake. When the car stopped, Leon stepped out and stood quietly, staring into Bear Hollow. The surroundings were peaceful, with no one in sight, only tall trees and dark clouds hanging in the sky. This is the place, Rachel said, standing next to Leon. Before it became a nature reserve, this area was a site for government experiments. Leon turned to her, his eyes full of doubt. Experiments? What are you talking about? Are you sure? Rachel didn't look at him but kept her eyes fixed on the space ahead. I'm sure. The children on that trip could have been part of an experiment the government conducted here. What happened afterward was concealed, and the disappearance of the children was part of that experiment. Leon felt like he was in shock. So, what do you know about all this? How do you know? I didn't directly participate in the experiments, Rachel replied, still not turning to look at him, but I have information from those involved. Some of the documents were erased, but I'm certain the children were part of a psychological experiment program. Leon was silent, thinking about Rachel's words. And you're sure this disappearance is connected to those experiments? Rachel looked at him, her eyes sharp. Do you want to know the truth? If you do, you'll have to face a cost you might not be ready for, but this is the only chance you have to uncover everything. The next morning, Leon woke up early without letting Rachel know. Since leaving Bear Hollow, he still had many unanswered questions in his mind. He felt he couldn't just rely on what Rachel had said. Everything she said still wasn't enough to fully convince him. He had to investigate on his own. Leon quickly packed his bag, grabbed a flashlight, and started his car, heading toward Bear Hollow, the forest that seemed like a great secret yet to be uncovered. Everything was the same. Nothing had changed since the first time he came. It was just the darkness and the silence of a place he still didn't fully understand. As Leon walked deeper into the forest, a strange feeling rose in his chest. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt that something important was hidden here. With every step, he felt he was uncovering things left unsaid, forgotten secrets. He stopped when he noticed a faint trail, overgrown with grass, but seemed like it had been used by someone before. The next step would lead him to some clue. He took out his phone, but only saw a blank screen. No signal. He stuffed the phone back into his pocket and continued on. After a while, he heard footsteps behind him, very soft but clear. Leon turned around, but saw nothing, only the shadows of the trees stretching on the ground. He sighed in relief, telling himself it was just his imagination. But not long after, the footsteps echoed again, this time closer. He stopped, looked around, and saw no one. Suddenly, a man's voice called out from the darkness, "What are you doing here?" Leon flinched, his eyes wide, scanning the surroundings. "Who's there?" he asked, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun in his pocket. There was no response. The footsteps came closer. Leon gripped the gun tightly, but there was no time to think. "I'm just taking a walk," he replied, trying to hide the tension in his voice. Suddenly, a figure rushed out like a storm. Leon hadn't reacted in time before being knocked to the ground, his gun falling out of reach. The attacker, tall and muscular, immediately grabbed Leon by the throat. "Not you!" the attacker growled, his voice threatening. "You shouldn't be here." Leon panicked, trying to push away the arm that was choking him. He felt the air leaving him, his vision starting to blur, but he couldn't stop. With a powerful kick to the attacker's stomach, Leon managed to push him back a bit, enough to catch his breath. He struggled, trying to get up and run out of the forest, but his head was spinning. The attacker wasn't giving up easily and continued to chase after him. "Is anyone there? Help me!" Leon gasped, trying to run as fast as he could. At that moment, the sound of an engine echoed from afar. "Get in!" a familiar voice called out. Leon tried to open his eyes, recognizing it was Rachel. "Leon, hurry!" Rachel shouted, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, alert. Leon didn't have time to think. He just ran towards the car and jumped in. The car doors slammed shut, and Rachel immediately accelerated, leaving the attacker behind, who stood there, unable to catch up. "Are you all right?" Rachel looked at Leon, her voice slightly concerned but trying to hide it. Leon didn't answer immediately, still gasping for breath. "Thank you," he whispered, his fist clenched, trying to regain his composure. "It's not the time to thank me," Rachel said, her eyes cold and determined. "You can't do this alone." Leon remained silent. Even though he didn't want to admit it, the truth was that he couldn't do it alone. Rachel had saved him, but was she helping him for some other reason? He couldn't shake the strange feeling he had about her. After a while, the car stopped in a safe area, far from the forest. Leon still couldn't completely calm down, but he felt better. He turned to look at Rachel, her eyes still focused on the road. "Thank you," Leon finally said again, but his voice wasn't as tired as before. Rachel didn't look back at him. She kept driving with her cold expression. "You can't do it alone. Without me, you wouldn't have survived." Leon sighed, a strange feeling in his chest. "I know, but I don't want anyone involved in this investigation unless they truly want to help me." "Then trust me," Rachel said in a single sentence, then said no more. She turned her gaze back to the window, not letting him see her emotions. But Leon realized something. In this situation, she was the only one he could rely on. Leon sat silently in Rachel's car, his gaze quietly fixed on the window. But inside, questions about the truth continued to swirl relentlessly. He didn't know if he could fully trust Rachel, But at this moment, she was the only one helping him. His investigation had reached dead ends too many times, and part of him felt that maybe Rachel was the key to uncovering the truth about the disappearance of the children on that trip years ago. After leaving the forested area, the car drove through quiet streets with no one in sight. Rachel drove down narrow roads, finally stopping in front of an old apartment, isolated from the residential area. "This is where I've hidden the important documents," Rachel said, her voice calm but with a hint of tension. "You need to know what happened, but you must keep this place a secret." Leon looked at the apartment in front of him, a feeling of doubt rising in him once again. Still, he didn't want to miss this opportunity. He was here now, and he couldn't stop. "Rachel, are you sure you don't want any more danger involved?" Leon asked, his voice lowering. Rachel just glanced at him and nodded. "I've been in the dark for too long, but now I want to help you. This won't change, no matter the danger." Entering the apartment, the air was gloomy, with a faint, musty smell from the old furniture. The items in the room seemed to have aged, and the silence was so deep that only the sound of their footsteps echoed. Rachel quickly walked toward a bookshelf near the window, pulled out a small drawer, and took out an old VHS tape, handing it to Leon. "Here," Rachel said, her voice a little tense. "This might help you find the answer, but be careful." Leon took the tape, a strange feeling creeping over him. This VHS tape certainly contained something important. He didn't speak, just looked at Rachel, then hurried over to the VHS player she had already set up. Leon inserted the tape and pressed play. The screen slowly lit up, and the first images were of a bus traveling along a narrow path. Leon stared intently at the screen, closing his eyes for a moment, the tension rising. The next part of the tape made him stop breathing. The bus on the screen suddenly turned left onto an unauthorized road. The surrounding scenery looked desolate, and there was no sign indicating this was a permitted route. The screen panned back, and then continued to show the bus driving deeper into the forested area. "See that?" Leon whispered, gripping the tape tightly, his eyes wide with tension. They knew exactly where the bus was going. Rachel stood next to him, watching the screen closely. Suddenly her expression changed, something in the footage surprising her. She shook her head slightly. "This is the evidence," Leon said, his voice hoarse, unable to hide the excitement building inside him. You didn't tell me about this tape." Rachel lowered her head, not answering immediately. She seemed to be thinking about something heavy. Finally she sighed and looked at Leon. "I didn't want you to misunderstand, Leon. I was also involved in this investigation before meeting you. These documents, I collected them during the investigation, but for safety reasons, I couldn't make them public." Leon looked at her, feeling the truth slowly begin to unravel, but still with many pieces of the puzzle left unsolved. "So, how did you get these things?" he asked, his voice stern. Rachel took a deep breath, then looked at him, her gaze determined. "Before I met you, I had been searching for the truth about this disappearance for a long time, but I couldn't face the forces behind all this alone. Everything, it's all just fragments, and I couldn't let it become a bigger secret." Leon didn't answer, just remained silent. He looked at the VHS tape in his hand, and in his mind, thoughts of Alan Baird, the trial teacher, became more frequent. Could he be a part of this plot? "Alan Baird," Leon muttered. "Is he connected to what happened?" Rachel looked up, her eyes no longer as cold as before. "Baird isn't just a teacher, he's part of the plan. No one knows much about him, but I have reason to believe that Baird may have known exactly what was going to happen on that trip." Leon looked at her, and for the first time he felt the tension between them begin to ease. "So why didn't you share this right from the start?" he asked, but his voice no longer held any doubt. Rachel didn't respond immediately, just gave a faint smile. "Because I wasn't sure. Everything is very dangerous, Leon. Once you step into this path, There's no turning back. Leon couldn't stop thinking about what he had just witnessed. The tape, the evidence, everything Rachel had said. It all made him suspicious about something much bigger that was being hidden. "What do I do next?" Leon asked, his voice a bit weary but filled with determination. "Where will this lead me?" Rachel looked at him, her gaze still firm. "You have to continue, but this time, don't do it alone. You won't be able to uncover all the truth if you keep going solo." Leon remained silent for a moment, thinking about Rachel's words. He couldn't deny that she had helped him reach a crucial step in his investigation. But was she really the ally he needed? "So what do we do next?" Leon asked again, his eyes resolute. Rachel smiled faintly, not answering, but the way she looked at him was enough to know that they wouldn't stop here. She had made up her mind to help him. Both of them understood there would be no turning back. Leon sat silently in Rachel's car, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. He could feel the tension in the car, but at the same time there was a strong urge inside him. He had to uncover the truth. Everything had started so long ago, but only now was he truly beginning the investigation. And with Rachel, he knew she was the only one who could help him achieve that, even though he still had doubts in his heart. "We're almost there?" Leon finally spoke, but his voice carried a hint of fatigue, as if he hadn't known where he was going for a long time. Rachel didn't answer right away, just kept driving fast, the headlights of the car cutting through the desolate road. She didn't look at him, her eyes focused ahead, distant. "You'll see," she finally replied briefly, as if she didn't want to explain more. Leon fell silent, feeling the tension rising within him. It was as if they were approaching something too large and dangerous for him to even dare think about the consequences. The car stopped in front of an empty lot, where there was no one around, only the rusted iron gates standing strong in the darkness. Leon stared at the gate. A growing sense of unease settled within him. "This is where the bus disappeared," Rachel said, not looking back at him. She opened the car door and stepped out. Leon followed, but his steps felt heavy. This place seemed like something forgotten a long time ago. There were no signs of life, only a silent, gloomy atmosphere surrounding them. The air here carried a coldness that was hard to describe. "Do you feel something?" Leon asked, his gaze drifting over the empty lot. Rachel turned to look at him, her eyes locking with his as if reading his thoughts. "This is where it began, and also where it ends," she said, her voice low and strange. Rachel continued to lead Leon in, walking along a narrow path, the beam of her flashlight illuminating the road ahead. They entered a larger area, and as they got closer, Leon noticed old concrete walls covered in moss. A rusty iron door appeared before them. Rachel paused for a moment, her hand gripping the doorknob. "We'll go in here," she said, her voice hoarse. The door creaked as Rachel pushed it open. Leon followed her, his eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. "This is where they conducted the experiments," Rachel said, her voice gravelly, as if this place had haunted her for a long time. Leon nodded, his eyes scanning everything in the room. He didn't say anything, but inside, he was tense. He had known this was the place the bus had disappeared, but he never could have imagined how many dark secrets it contained. Rachel walked over to a large table covered with scattered papers and began flipping through the documents. "You need to see what I've gathered," she said as she pulled out an old notebook. "These documents might help you answer the questions you've been asking for so long." Leon walked over, intently staring at the notebook. He quickly realized it was a list of students, bizarre psychological experiments, and notes about trials he couldn't fully comprehend. "These kids," Leon mumbled, his hands gripping the notebook tightly. "You're saying they became subjects of experiments?" Rachel didn't respond immediately, only nodded. They didn't just disappear. They were subjects in a psychological experiment program. The government funded these experiments. Leon felt a shock hit his mind. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "How do you know all this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Rachel didn't answer right away. She just stood silently looking at him. "Because I was involved in this investigation, but I couldn't do anything when they had protected these secrets so well. All I could do was gather what I found, but I couldn't make it public." Leon felt another shock. "Then why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" Rachel turned to look at him, her eyes sharp. "Because I wasn't sure you would understand how dangerous it is. We are all pawns in a bigger game." He looked at Rachel. "Then Baird, Alan Baird, is he involved in all this?" Rachel sighed. "He's not just a teacher. He's part of this plan. You'll understand soon." Leon took out his phone and began snapping pictures of the documents. All these pieces of evidence had to be preserved. They couldn't be lost. He worked quickly, his hands shaking but still focused. Each picture was saved to his phone, but the tension inside him grew stronger. "What are you doing?" Rachel asked, looking at Leon with a questioning gaze. "This is evidence. I need to get everything to prove what happened," Leon replied quickly, his eyes still glued to the phone screen. Rachel didn't say anything more. She understood exactly what Leon needed to do in that moment. And the important thing was, they had to leave quickly. When everything had been photographed, Leon closed his phone and exhaled. He felt the tension in his body, but at least he now had the evidence. He couldn't leave without it. "Let's go," Rachel said, her voice a little hurried. Leon looked back at her. "Are you sure you don't want to look for anything else?" Rachel glanced at him once, her eyes seeming to weigh something. "We've got enough," she answered quickly. "You don't want to stay here any longer." They both headed towards the door, but as they neared it, Leon suddenly felt a wave of dizziness hit him. His head felt heavy, and his steps became unsteady. He tried to stay steady, but everything before him began to blur, and suddenly he couldn't keep his balance anymore. "Rachel," he muttered, grabbing the door, struggling to stay upright. Rachel turned back immediately, seeing Leon standing unsteadily. "Leon, what's wrong with you?" Before Leon could answer, he felt his entire body collapse. His vision blurred, and everything around him turned dark. He could no longer hold on to consciousness, and his body began to lose all strength. Rachel rushed to him, but only managed to catch Leon before he completely collapsed. She bent down, anxiously looking at Leon. "You can't do this. You have to wake up," she called out, her hands gripping his shoulders. But Leon didn't respond. Only his faint breathing remained in the silent room. Rachel felt something was wrong. She pulled Leon up, fumbling, trying to help him regain consciousness, but she couldn't. Finally, she panicked and looked around, but everything was silent. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and quickly called a friend. "We need help," she said urgently. "We can't stay here long." Leon slowly opened his eyes, his head pounding as if struck by a hammer. The dizziness and numbness in his body made it hard for him to understand what was happening. He looked around, trying to make sense of where he was. The bare concrete walls with no windows were dimly lit by a single light bulb. His hands were shackled, the heavy chains restricting his every move. He tried to move, but couldn't. His whole body felt trapped in a dark cocoon. The feeling of confusion rose within him, but one thing became clear in his mind. He was being held captive. The door to the room creaked open, and a figure stepped in. It was Eleanor Rutherford. Leon lifted his head. Although his head was still spinning, the rage and fury within him made him forget the physical pain. Who are you?" he asked hoarsely. "Why are you doing all of this? Why mess with those kids, the missing children? What did you do to them?" Eleanor entered slowly, not in a hurry, and casually walked toward an armchair nearby, sitting down with a cold, determined expression. "Ah, Leon, you're finally awake," she said calmly. "I'm sure you have many questions." Leon struggled to sit up, but his wrists were tightly shackled, his body heavy and weak. He swallowed, his eyes filled with anger. "You have to answer me. Where did those kids go? How can you be so calm about it? You turned them into experiments." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she quietly observed Leon with sharp eyes. After a moment of silence, she spoke. "You don't understand, Leon. Those children didn't just disappear. They were part of a psychological experiment program funded by the government." Hearing those words felt like a direct blow to his mind. Experiments? What the hell is that? You're talking about people, not lab rats. Eleanor chuckled lightly, unfazed. "You can't understand right now. You think you're the only one hurt, but you haven't seen the full picture. Everything has a reason. What we're doing is far more important than anything you can imagine. Silence is necessary to protect the truth." Leon gritted his teeth in anger. "You've ruined the lives of so many kids. You've taken everything from them." Eleanor calmly looked into Leon's eyes. "You can't change that, Leon. We all have a role in this game, and there's nothing you can do but accept it." Leon felt as if someone had hit him in the head. The truth was too brutal, too vast. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. "Then what do you want from me?" Leon asked, his voice low and full of despair. "Do you want me to stay silent?" Eleanor stood up and walked out of the room without saying another word. She left Leon in the darkness. After Eleanor left, the room fell silent. Leon still sat there, his wrists and ankles shackled, with no way out. He felt like he was being pushed into a corner with no escape. But then another door opened. Leon lifted his head. "Leon, are you okay?" It was Rachel, once again, arriving just in time to save him. He opened his mouth but couldn't get any words out. "Rachel, why are you here?" he panted, his voice trembling with surprise and fear. "You came to save me, right? You need to run. Go now. You don't know how dangerous this place is. Forget about me and expose the truth. You have to do it. You can't just stand by and let this continue." Rachel walked up to Leon. "You want me to leave you behind? Fine, I'll do that." Leon looked into her eyes. "Don't worry about me. Leave now before we're caught. You don't have much time. Go." Rachel laughed loudly. "Leon, you really trust me now? Now you're worried about me? You're making me feel touched, but I think you should worry about yourself first. I was the one who shackled you after all, so why are you worried about me?" Leon felt like a shock had struck his heart. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Everything around him seemed to spin. He looked at Rachel, searching for the truth in her eyes, but found nothing but indifference and coldness. What did you just say?" Leon stammered, struggling to process her words. You just shackled me?" Rachel didn't answer, only smiled faintly. "Yes, I was the one who shackled you. Didn't you realize? Everything you've done I've been watching and controlling. I know every step you've taken. Surely you didn't think I was just an innocent ally, did you?" Leon went silent. Her words were like a slap in the face. Everything he had been trying to build suddenly crumbled. Everything he had believed about Rachel was just a performance, a deception he hadn't known about. You did all this for her, didn't you? Everything you've done? You're just a tool for Eleanor?" Rachel showed no sign of regret. She looked at him indifferently, her eyes sharp. "Yes, I've used you to monitor everything. Every action I've taken has had a purpose. The purpose was to lead you into this trap." Leon felt as though he was being pushed into an abyss. He wanted to stand, but the chains were too heavy and his body too weak. You have no compassion at all?" Leon shouted, but his voice was weak, lacking strength. Rachel took a step closer, her face nearly emotionless. "Compassion? No, Leon. This isn't the time for pity. That's why I work for Eleanor. I have to complete my mission." Leon tried to comprehend what Rachel had just said, but he couldn't accept it. "You can't do this to me, to Maya, those kids. How could you use them like that?" Rachel fell silent for a moment, then softly replied, "I don't use anyone. I just do what I have to do. If you can't understand that, then that's your problem." Leon couldn't say anything else. He felt everything he had fought for, everything he had hoped for, was just an illusion. What he had believed in Rachel had now turned into a heavy shock. Rachel looked at him one last time, then turned away. "You will never win, Leon. You can't change what has happened. And don't hope that someone will help you. You have no one left." The door opened again, and Rachel stepped outside, leaving Leon in the dark room with no way out. Everything inside him seemed to collapse completely. He was left with only one question in his mind: why? Eleanor stood in the control room, the light from the surveillance screen casting a glow on her face, highlighting her cold and decisive expression. On the screen, Leon was struggling in his shackles, desperately trying to resist exhaustion and despair. This scene was nothing new to her. It was the result of a long-term plan. She smiled, smug with the effort she had put in over the years. "Everything is finished. You can't change anything now, Leon," she whispered, her lips curling into a victorious grin. "You've lost." She glanced at Leon once more on the screen, as if to make sure he couldn't do anything more. Then Eleanor turned away, leaving the control room with a satisfied smile. However, just as she was about to step through the door, a frantic employee rushed in, his face pale, hastily delivering a report. "Mrs. Eleanor, there's urgent news. A major article has just been published. The entire world is buzzing about the disappearance of 13 students." Eleanor stopped, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What article?" "It's from journalist Daria," the employee replied, his voice trembling. "She's made all the evidence public, including documents, audio recordings, and a VHS tape. She's revealed the truth about the government's secret experiment program. Everything has been exposed." Daria. That name hit Eleanor's mind like a hammer. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Daria was someone she had ignored, someone who wasn't part of her plan. But now, everything had changed. An unplanned pawn had defeated her. "What did she do?" Eleanor growled, stepping closer to the screen and staring at the article running across the employee's monitor. The headline appeared clearly: "The Secret Experiment Program and the Disappearance of 13 Students, the Truth Behind the Silence." Below the headline was a detailed list of information, fully published, from classified documents to the VHS tape that Leon had sent. It was all clear, detailed, and undeniable. Eleanor stood frozen, her face hardened. A surge of anger and helplessness rose within her. "Daria!" She repeated the name, as though she wanted to crush it. "Has everything been exposed?" The employee nodded, his face even paler. "Mrs. Eleanor, the article is spreading. People are contacting us, asking for more information. We can't control the situation anymore." Eleanor clenched her fists, her hands trembling with rage. "Damn it!" she muttered under her breath, then turned back to the employee, her eyes burning with fury. "Everything must be shut down immediately. Everything. We can't let this truth get out. You must contact my allies. They need to do something." The employee stood silently, unable to speak, when Eleanor raised her hand and shouted, "Go, immediately! Don't make me say it again!" Meanwhile, in Daria's office, she was sitting across from her computer, staring at the screen where her article was being shared widely. Notifications from phone calls kept ringing. Journalists from everywhere were calling, asking for more information, demanding details related to the case. Daria's eyes didn't leave the screen. Her article had not only caused a stir, but had also triggered an investigation from the authorities. But Daria knew that the truth always comes with danger, and she had prepared herself for that. At the same time, in a dark detention room, Leon sat dazed, his body too exhausted. But in his heart, a spark of hope still burned. He had done the right thing. Though he was held captive, with no way out, At least he had done the most important thing. He had sent all the evidence Daria needed. Leon had contacted Daria earlier because she was a reputable and trustworthy journalist. Just before he was captured, Leon had sent all the important documents to Daria, photos of the materials, the VHS tape, and all the information he had gathered during his investigation. He knew that even if he had to sacrifice himself, someone else would take his place and bring the truth to light. In the control room, Eleanor stepped in, her sharp eyes focused on Leon through the screen. Although she had captured Leon, she hadn't kept the evidence he had gathered. "You think you've won?" Eleanor sneered, her voice cold. "You can't change anything. You're just a pawn in my game." Leon couldn't respond. He remained silent. But inside, a fire of hope still burned. He knew that even though she could extinguish his life, the truth wouldn't be buried. Daria would do what was right, and everyone would know. At that moment, in a secret meeting in Eleanor's office, her allies were trying to find a way to shut down the scandal. They couldn't let the truth about the psychological experiment program and the disappearance be exposed any further, but when one of them opened the door and reported new developments, things had already changed. "Mrs. Eleanor, we can't control the situation anymore. Too many people know about this now." Eleanor stood still, her brow raised. "What's going on?" "It's not just the media. A huge wave is rising. We're facing a large-scale investigation from other authorities. They've contacted government agencies, requesting documents about the disappearance." Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. All her plans were in serious jeopardy. A storm was coming, and she didn't know if she would be able to survive it. "What?" Eleanor said, her voice filled with menace. "If we can't shut this down, we need to make sure they have no chance of continuing, at all costs." Eleanor stood silently by the window of her office, the dim light from the street lamps casting shadows on her face, making her expression even darker. Outside, the world was in chaos due to the secret experiments and the loss of the 13 missing students, but Eleanor couldn't tear herself away from the anger building up inside her chest. She stared at the articles flooding the internet, the large headlines full of criticism. The documents that Leon and Daria had made public not only shocked the public, but also forced the investigative agencies to act. Everything was now beyond her control. The door to her office creaked open. Randolph, Eleanor's longtime associate, entered, his face full of worry. "You need to do something," he said softly, looking directly at Eleanor. "The truth is out now. Things can't go back to how they were." Eleanor didn't turn to look at him. She stood still, her cold eyes gazing out into the darkness outside the window. "It's impossible," she said in a low, sharp voice. "She won't stop. What Daria did, I will do it again." "Don't you understand?" Randolph continued, stepping closer with obvious anxiety. "She's exposed everything. Leon, he did it before we could act. The articles, the information." Eleanor turned to face him, her gaze filled with ruthlessness. "This isn't over. Both Leon and Daria don't understand what we've done. But I'll show them my power. I'll never let a pawn like Leon or a journalist like Daria destroy what I've built." She took a deep breath and walked toward her desk, opening a drawer. Inside were old photos, deleted documents, and copies of the experiment she had been running for years. They were powerful evidence to protect her, but now they were turning against her. Everything must be stopped immediately. If I have to sacrifice everything, I will. As night fell, police and investigative vehicles began to gather around the area where Eleanor had conducted her experiments. Everything was slipping out of control. The articles, Leon's documents, had been widely publicized, and no one could ignore the investigation. It seemed like everything had been decided, but Eleanor refused to yield. With her last remaining allies, she was looking for a way to undermine this investigation. A moment later, Eleanor stepped out of her office, trying to remain calm. The night was late, but the darkness enveloped everything, just like her life, still submerged in unhidable shadows. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. One of her employees rushed in, his face pale. "Mrs. Eleanor, everything is spiraling out of control." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "Don't tell me we've failed." "We can't stop now," the employee said, his voice trembling. "The investigative agencies have started to act. The evidence has been sent, and the truth about the experiment program has forced people to speak out. Some of your allies are backing out. They don't want to be involved in this anymore." Eleanor stood still for a moment, her lips pressed tightly together. "No one is backing out. No one has the right to abandon me." She turned around and walked to her desk, pulling a thick file from the drawer. These documents were the foundation of the plan she had followed for many years. The children in the experiment, the psychological tests, all had been meticulously hidden, but now everything had been exposed. Eleanor took a deep breath and stood up. "Prepare yourselves. We will not let everything crumble without a fight." Outside, reporters were surrounding the newsroom, constantly demanding information about the case. People no longer criticized Eleanor. They were asking for an answer, an explanation. But now, she didn't have the strength to hide everything anymore. The articles had condemned the crimes she had committed, and no one could turn a blind eye. She received word from her last remaining allies. The investigation couldn't be stopped, but a part of her still believed she could turn things around. However, the truth had begun to take root in the public's heart. People were beginning to realize what was really going on. While Eleanor isolated herself in a private room, the media continued to report on the disappearances and the secret experiments. The authorities were tightening their investigation. The photos from Leon, the audio recordings, all the documents he had sent to Daria had now become undeniable evidence. Now, everything was no longer a game. Everyone could clearly see that Eleanor couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. The investigation would not stop until justice was served. The next day, the trials began. Eleanor Rutherford, who had once stood at the peak of power, was now facing accusations she couldn't deny. The truth about the secret experiments had been made public, and all the reporters, investigators, and human rights organizations were standing in support of justice. Eleanor sat in the courtroom, her eyes filled with rage and helplessness. Everything she had tried to build was now crumbling. Finally, she realized that no matter how strong she was, the truth would always prevail. But Eleanor wasn't one to give up easily. She knew that even if she couldn't go back, she would have to live with the consequences of the actions she had taken. Everything had been exposed, and she would have to face it all. The day Eleanor Rutherford finally had to face the crimes she had hidden for years was not a peaceful day. She sat in the courtroom, her eyes no longer sharp and bright as before, but filled with weariness and confusion. Her heart pounded in her chest, every passing second bringing her closer to the day she would have to pay the price. Yet deep inside, Eleanor still refused to accept defeat. She knew that somehow there would be a way to retain power, to avoid standing in the face of this final confrontation. All eyes were on her. Reporters from major newspapers were present, recording every development in the courtroom. They knew this battle would not end with an ordinary trial. For Eleanor, this was a life-or-death struggle. She could not accept that the career, the power she had built, would be torn apart in just one trial. And for people like Leon, they could no longer witness the end of this battle. They couldn't stay to see justice, but at least they had been the flame that lit the dark paths. When the trial ended, an inevitable verdict was delivered. Eleanor Rutherford was convicted of her involvement in the government's secret experiment program, in the disappearance of 13 students, and of having used the children as subjects in psychological experiments. The evidence that Leon had gathered and the articles by Daria had shaken society to its core, and no one could deny the truth anymore. Outside the courthouse, the families of the victims, survivors of the experiments, and those who had fought for justice all gathered in front of the court. They were waiting for the final result of a long and exhausting battle. Some people were holding signs with phrases like, "Justice for the 13 missing students," "No more secrets," "The truth will prevail." Daria stood among the crowd, quietly observing. A strange feeling rose within her, part joy, because justice had been served, and part sorrow, deep sorrow for Leon's sacrifice. She felt his absence, but at the same time, she could also feel the strength he had left behind. He had done what she couldn't. He had helped the world see the truth, even at the cost of his life. A person in the crowd looked at her, their eyes filled with empathy. "You're the one who helped bring the truth to light," they said. Daria replied, "Leon did everything so we could be here today." Daria smiled faintly, a smile that was both sad and resolute. She looked towards the courthouse where everything had ended. She was not the only one who had helped bring the truth to light. She was just a part of this long story, but the truth would survive forever, and people like Eleanor would have to pay the price. A few months later, as things began to settle down, Daria continued her work. She wrote more articles about what had happened, exposing all the details of the secret experiments that Eleanor and her co-conspirators had carried out. But there was one thing that Daria knew for sure. The story of Leon would never be forgotten. He was the one who had started this battle, and he would always be the hero in her eyes, even though he was no longer here. Daria's articles didn't just stop at bringing the truth to light. She also helped bring the case to international forums, forcing the government to take responsibility for their actions. Investigations continued, and although people like Eleanor had been arrested, the war was far from over. This story still continued, and with each passing day, the truth was further solidified. Daria stood alone in her office, looking at the photos that Leon had taken, photos that no one would have seen if it weren't for him. She remembered the moments he had shared, the promises he made to never give up. She picked up one of Leon's photos, staring into his determined, passionate eyes, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "You did it," Daria whispered, her eyes welling up. "You did it." She stood up, walking towards the window, where sunlight streamed in. Everything around her seemed calmer. She knew that the truth had finally been revealed, and that was the legacy that Leon had left for the world.